I mentioned storylines, and you both indicated to me that it had been done, and I didn't realize it. That's a risk you run often. Even the best read of us, not to be defensive about it, aren't totally aware of all the classic literature, and you'll come up with a plot line which you think is altogether unique and your own. I once did a show on the Twilight Zone about a guy who makes a bet that he can keep quiet for a whole year. Now, I did not realize it at the time, but there was a short story called The Bet, and I think a Chekhov short story, unless I'm mistaken.
That's one where he was locked in the glass room in the men's club.
That's right. Yeah. He constantly talks, and a fella says to him, if you keep quiet and are willing to, you know, be under observation, so we know you don't talk, and not say a word for 1 year, I'll give you 50,000 pounds. And he says, great, because he desperately needed the money. So they put him in this glass room. Do you recall this story? Mm-hmm. And he doesn't say a word. And there are two switches to this story. Number one, the year ends, and he is let out of his glass room, and in truth, he has said not a word. But the guy who made the bet with him, despite the fact that he's a member of the club, doesn't have 50,000 pounds. He doesn't have 5 pounds. And here is a guy who's remained silent for an entire year to win a bet, and the guy can't honor his bet. And then the second switch is that our talkative one is so talkative that he really didn't believe that he could stay quiet. So he had his larynx cut, his sound box. So you have the double irony there. Now, if, for example, I pose the problem to you that there is a talkative one amongst us, and somebody makes a bet with him that he'll remain silent for a year, can you fill up a story this way? What happens? The silence is absolutely...
No, see, right now...
You can take it a lot of different ways.
Tell me one.
You could take it in terms of what the man then does do, assuming that he's not put in such a glass cage.
Go on.
Assuming that he then must fulfill his need to talk by other activities.
Go on. You're coming close to Chekhov now, Steve.
Yeah, you can take it through all kinds of very, very strong emotions and very, very strong kinds of physical things. You could take it to his writings. You could take it to a certain kind of concentration on his own inner self, self-analysis.
So what happens at the end of the year? No, follow the point. Can you tell me?
As I said, there are 5 or 6 different ways that you could do it.
All right, let's say I'm going to give you the Chekhov line now. There's a altogether shallow, talkative, big-mouthed klutz who makes this bet. In the Chekhov story, he goes in and for the first time in his life has a kind of an enforced serenity. There's nothing he can do because talking has always been a sort of force majeure. That's all he can do properly. He begins to read. Do you recall the story, Doris?
No.
And after 12 months of reading the classic literature of our time, he comes out the most well-rounded, the most beautifully thoughtful, sensitive human being who ever lived. He knows Thoreau, he knows Socrates, he knows Moses, he knows the word of God, he knows the word of the ancients and of the angels, and he becomes an altogether incredibly well-rounded man. That's the Chekhov story.
There's another way you could take that, assuming that he accepted the bet, and then following him in those situations where we normally communicate our feeling by talking, in a love situation, with a child, with friends, and all of the emotions, and then scoring the fact that he's having a very difficult time and is very inarticulate by action, by the actions of love or fatherhood, signs, the languages of sign, and touch.
Without voice,
and
he cannot do these things.
But finding at the end of the year that his difficulty gets less, he brings this under control so that at the end of the year, when he's about to win the bet, that doesn't matter anymore because he's found that words are not a particularly
That's pretty reasonable.
I'm more cruel than that because I would have him need that money desperately to... He feels that the money would help him get his marriage on stable grounds, you know, have his children love him and all this sort of thing. But by the time he's been quiet and hasn't communicated with anybody for a year, everything's fallen apart anyway, and he can't...
that goes back to the old, you know, my wife needs an operation or something.
Say when he went in the room, he felt he needed the money. When he came out, he no longer felt he needed the money at all.
Exactly the Chekhov line, Dave.
But as he walks out of the room, everybody will not talk to him. They just walk away, and then he sees the hearse go by in the road.
Mm-hmm. You went Chekhov one better.